Welcome in to Blake Street Banter, the Rockies insider on Blake Street Banter. With me, Patrick, Lyons, and of course, the inimitable. That's right. I'm using that word to describe you, Noah. Noah Spirek. What's going on, buddy?
Hey, I like that. I like that intro. I'm doing good. How are you?
Doing well. Feeling a lot better after some allergies kind of plagued me last week in Arizona. Wasn't able to get back on the horse for week 2, but here we are in week 3, and we're going to have like a Cal Ripken-like streak, I think.
Let's do it. Yeah.
How many shows would that actually be if we had over 2,000 straight shows? Well, if we're only doing one a week, I mean, it would be 4 years until we reach 200. So for the next 40 years, Noah, you've signed a contract. So,
well, we've got to get to the record or else it's all for naught. So we can't get to 30 and then stop there.
Yeah, we're getting some cold weather in Colorado. It seems to have broken through a little bit. It's a little bit warmer, but just in general, the sunny days seem sunnier. And the simple fact that there's baseball every day, it's spring training. The games don't mean anything. Well, that's not exactly true, but it doesn't mean as much as they do in the regular season. And I imagine with all of the day games going on, I feel like it, for a lot of Rockies fans, it helps the day go by a little bit quicker, right?
I'll tell you straight up, today it helped me get the day by quicker because I'm sitting in class and I got to watch, not the stream because it wasn't televised today, but I got to watch the MLB.com kind of interactive look that they have. And gosh, I watched the first 3 innings in class and we scored a lot of runs. The Rockies scored a lot of runs. So that was really enjoyable.
Yeah, they blew out the Cincinnati Reds, and what was it, 9-5?
Yeah,
and
the Reds got a couple runs late.
They did get one in the 9th off Seth Halvorsen. That was the first run he's allowed this spring. And going into Tuesday's game, believe it or not, so the Rockies didn't have the best record. They had one extra loss than the Chicago Cubs, who I think were like 6-0 to start spring training. Again, win-loss record is meaningless, but we're going to talk about it, have a little fun. Rockies 8-3, so a half a game back of the best record in the Cactus League. But maybe the biggest thing, they had a plus 28 run differential going into today. They added to that. And then you know what the Cubs ended up doing today? No, I don't know if you saw the box score for that one.
I didn't see what the score was.
Yeah. So I was all ready to fire off a tweet of like, oh man, look at the run differential, best in all of baseball. Oh, okay. Well, the split squad Padres gave up 15 more runs than they were able to score. So you can't actually say that the Rockies have the best run differential, but they've been great. Pitchers have a team ERA under 4. It's right around like 3.7. So, overall, everybody playing really, really well.
And it's been fun to watch because it's not that the Rockies are leaning so much on the guys that have been there before, but they've gotten a lot of contributors from not only their young guys, but also guys that they've brought in the offseason kind of paying dividends. One of the first examples to come to mind, Nick Martini. He's 5 for 14 so far on the spring, and any contribution you can get from him on the offensive side feels like an added bonus. And so early on, really, really liking the returns on a lot of the guys that the Rockies got in free agency.
Martini's an interesting one because there hasn't been a lot of discussion about him in camp so far. And he was just one of those names that was a non-roster invite, added at the same time as Keston Hiura. And it was like, okay, cool. You need some depth pieces. But as I look at this roster and as it shakes out, and I think, we'll get to right field and we'll get to Jordan Beck. He got the thumbnail. So obviously he's doing something right. But you look at the bench spots, and besides backup catcher, your utility infielder in Kyle Farmer, your fourth outfielder in Sam Hilliard, you still have one more spot on the bench. And when you look at what Nick Martini has been able to do, as you pointed out, hitting for average so far, does have 2 home runs, but maybe even more importantly, 4 walks and only 2 strikeouts. So he's been providing a really good at-bat. And when you look at what his numbers have been in the last 2 years for the Cincinnati Reds in the outfield and playing a little bit of first base, you go, you know what? He's got that veteranosity that Bud Black does seem to like. And maybe, just maybe, he ends up breaking camp going down to Tampa on March 28th.
Yeah, I think you said it. Bud Black loves his veterans to be in the lineup, providing as much as possible. And sometimes the fans are a bit frustrated by that. And, Blake Street Banter, we're all about the prospects, but the kids have been playing regardless, especially last season. And it certainly seems like there's a lot of opportunity built into the plan this year for a lot of young guys. But right now, here we are 2 weeks into spring training already, or closing in on it. It's just been fun to watch a lot of guys kind of stepping up. Chris Bryant staying healthy and saying post-game today, feeling good, right? He's going to go out tomorrow and I believe take 8 at-bats on the side field, he said. It's good to see him back, and his bat speed has been a bit of a story online. What do you have on that?
Yeah, I know last year he was about 69.5 miles per hour. So far this spring, like 72.5. So up 3 miles an hour. We saw that one home run that he hit last Tuesday that traveled 462 feet, about 112 mile an hour exit velocity. When you see something like that and you look at the numbers, like the behind the scene numbers, which in many ways can be more important than, did that ball fall in for a base hit? Did you hit your home run with the bases empty or the bases loaded? All of a sudden, 4 RBI makes you think, and gets you a lot more excited than just the 1 RBI. So the numbers behind the scenes looking really well for Bryant. That being said, with his track record of being on the IL, he still has certain back issues. How are you approaching 2025 in terms of Chris Bryant? Are you beginning to think like, can he stay healthy enough? Do you just want to see him out there 120 games? What is success? What does momentum look like for Chris Bryant for you? And are you finding yourself kind of pumping the brakes a little bit and saying, I can't start thinking about him being a 30 home run guy now. He's still got to go out there and just play first. What's your stance on KB right now?
Yeah, well, here we are entering the 4th year of Chris Bryant in purple, and he's yet to play more than 80 games in a single season. So to me, a successful year is him playing 3 out of every 4 days, 120 or so games. That'd be a major step forward from what we've seen out of him. And gosh, if the Rockies are going to plug him as the 4-hole DH that he proved early in his career he could be, I think that a successful season, if he touches 20 home runs, we're ecstatic. And I think Bud Black is nodding his head in agreement, because you just want anything out of your 4-hole hitter. And Chris Bryant brings a veteran presence where, with Charlie Blackmon stepping away, and he played a lot of games as the designated hitter last year, you're going to need to be able to depend on someone. And for me, I think Chris Bryant just playing 120 games and having a WRC plus, above 95 would be fantastic. What do you break down as a successful season for KB?
I think, what I like about our show that we've got here and our back and forth, this is only number 2, but when you and I talked 2 weeks ago, when I was down there at Salt River Fields, we kicked some things around and you knocked some dust loose on a couple of the brain particles in my skull. And it got me thinking in different ways. And the next day I immediately asked Buddy about, what does success look like for Bryant, and does he need momentum? And Bud said, you know what, that's actually very fair. Like, KB does need some momentum going into this season, and some momentum for the season, because as you said, it's his 4th year. And he's still got 3 more years beyond that. We're not even halfway through this deal. So just as you said, playing 120 games is a step forward. And now, again, he's 4 or 5 years older now going into 2026. That's a whole separate thing. But now all of a sudden you have something to kind of lean back on and to feel better about and to rely upon, and at least know what you're going to get. And if it is only going to be 120 games each and every year, you might be able to play that out at the right times of the year, keep them healthy deeper into the season, especially if, the Rockies are going to be contenders as soon as 2026. So having some of that momentum this spring, I think, has been helpful for him. Only 3 for 12, but 250 batting average again. You'd probably take that right now. Has the homer, 2 walks, and 2 strikeouts. So again, he's putting the ball in play. 2 Ks to 12 strikeouts, small sample size, which we'll be saying that a lot, I imagine, during this episode. But still, that's some really good momentum for him. Only been a DH so far, but that's really the only thing that he needs to be right now in 2025.
Yeah, I've been pleased. I think just seeing him hit the 1 homer is almost like a checkbox in everyone's head. Like, okay, he still can hit the ball over the wall, because his batting average in his years in Colorado hasn't been bad, but it feels like every time he throws out a hit, it's a looping single into the vast Coors Field outfield, and whatever, he's getting on base. but that home run was really, really exciting to see. And with him stepping into the DH exclusive role in a perfect world, kind of, I think we consider the outfield position battle. And, as you said, our thumbnail player is Jordan Beck. Feels like a pivotal year in spring for him to try to lock down some innings. Another guy that figures to be on the conversation and was on the roster last year, Sean Bouchard. He's hitting 444 this spring, and he's got an 833 slug. So he's been producing, and he's always been kind of a veteran at bat, even as a young player, with the ability to earn a walk and get on base. What do you see out of not only Sean Bouchard, but kind of how does he fit into this puzzle of what figures to be a revolving door as the third or fourth outfield spot?
Yeah, he's so interesting because he's sort of been that Connor Joe guy since Connor Joe left, where at least you look at him and say, hey, he's going to have good at-bats. He's going to take pitches. He's going to draw walks. Not a great defender in the outfield. I think Connor Joe was maybe a little bit better than some of the metrics when he was in left field, was fine over at first base. But Bouchard is going to be more of a corner outfield type of guy. So, there is that component that doesn't give you as much flexibility as someone like a Nick Martini. But Bouchard is on the 40-man roster. Martini is not. They'll have to weigh that if, somewhere in his deal as a 35-year-old Nick Martini, I imagine his agency, has worked some kind of clause in the deal where if he's not put on the 40-man roster by a certain date, and that might not even be opening day, it could even be a month into the season, but the Rockies might have to make a choice where they say, well, it's either going to be Martini, Bouchard. We can't have both. We can't, start with Bouchard as our, backup right fielder or backup left fielder, as it were, and provide a pinch hit opportunities off the bench and also still have Martini in AAA. You might not have that luxury to do. So that's going to be another one of those battles because, again, Bud Black is probably going to tend to lean towards the veterans versus going with something like a hot shot and maybe having a needle mover like a Zach Veen, who could be key off the bench late in games, either as a defensive replacement or just as a guy who can steal a base. Which would you rather see? Or rather, I should say, what's more important to you? That someone like a Zach Veen, who obviously can impact the Rockies right away, would you rather see him get regular at-bats in AAA and then, maybe get that opportunity to start somewhat frequently should someone go down on the IL, or just not get the job done and Zach Veen's the hot hand? Or do you want him on that opening day roster where maybe he only starts twice a week and maybe he only gets a pinch hit opportunity in 2 other games? What's your stance on some of the young guys like that?
That's a really good question. And I think based on what we've seen in the past with the Rockies, with what they did with Tovar, bringing him up to get a taste, it doesn't really matter if you play good or bad in the week that you're up, and then having a plan for next season or maybe later in the year for a guy like Nolan Jones, who came up, didn't even play in a game, got sent back down, and then later came up and made an impact. I think getting regular at-bats in the minor leagues is extremely beneficial, and I'd rather have Zach Veen start in AAA if it means that he can carve out a role later this season as a regular innings guy, or like you said, if someone gets hurt, which it's baseball and you play at Coors Field, anything can happen. I just don't want it to be anything like what happened to Drew Romo late last year, where he comes up, secures some pretty regular playing time in the first week or so, maybe 2 weeks that he's there, and then is all of a sudden maybe pinch running, twice a week. I don't want that to happen. And, I'm a huge Zach Veen guy. So if it was to just pick one to play more games next year, I would pick Zach Veen over a Sean Bouchard, for example, who we were talking about. I think having a spark plug like that is super beneficial. That being said, I'm not putting him in a position where he gets to struggle and then sit on the bench and have to think about how bad he struggled.
Yeah, I think typically I would agree with you, and that general sentiment of sitting on the bench versus having regular at bats in AAA. But I think when you're a young player like a Zach Veen, who is playing well so far in spring training, numbers aren't off the board. He, in our outline of players that have numbers that are popping off the page, he didn't qualify for that, right? He's just been good, right? He's had his home run, he's had his bat flip, he's stolen a couple bases, 3, I believe. I think for someone like him, it's important for him to get a taste of the majors. So if there are things that he needs to work on, maybe he needs to get, knocked in the face a little bit by some big league pitchers to realize, wow, I do need to work on those things that the coaching staff have been telling me I need to do. That, again, that's assuming that he's not already doing those things. But I think giving him that opportunity, and because he can come off the bench and be a pinch runner late in games, and you'd like for Jordan Beck to be playing all 9, but if there is some kind of right-handed, left-handed platoon where you're able to get Zach Veen some starts, or if Nolan Jones is struggling, you can allow him to take the day off where maybe there's a little bit less pressure on himself. You can do that. You might be able to find a way to get Veen in the lineup, or maybe you even you're putting Nolan Jones as the DH and you're putting Zach Veen in left field, or Zach Veen's the DH. Look, we all can remember a time in which Raimel Tapia was a DH from time to time because he was the 9th best hitter that was on the Rockies 26-man roster. So I think you can find a way to get Veen into games. And you know what? If it doesn't work out, you have to play him. You do have to play him somewhat regularly, but if it doesn't work out, then you can send him back to AAA and get those regular at-bats. But at least that kind of gets his clock started in the best way possible. And the Rockies right now, they don't have any young prospects where, it used to be about 10 years ago where there'd be a lot of, and there still exists, service time manipulation. So you can keep a guy, an extra year, and those things still kind of happen. But in general, unless you're a huge prospect, an average big leaguer, no major league team is really trying to hold on to that guy for an extra year because they're an average major leaguer. When you're an average major leaguer, there's a good chance you could lose your way and then just get designated for assignment or get non-tendered. So unless you're a super special talent, you don't have to worry about that service time manipulation. So I think, go ahead and give Zach Veen an opportunity because look, he's part of the future of the team. A couple extra wins and a couple extra RBI opportunities early on in the season because of Nick Martini or Sean Bouchard happened to get on base and have a good at bat. I feel like that just has a lot less of an impact on the future of this team than Zach Veen making his debut and getting that ball rolling.
I'm with you on that. I think also you factor in, you get him regular at bats in the minor leagues, and what happens if he gets hurt again? And then you're waiting a whole nother year. I mean, he's battled injury after injury. And that would be the last thing you want to have happen where you set yourself back. I think this has been a great conversation about if Zach Veen is that next guy in line. I think other players that are playing their way closer to that border, one being Nolan Jones, because we know what happened last year with his struggles. And then so far in the spring, he's below 200, barely 20 at-bats. So super small sample size. As you mentioned, we'd say a lot. I think he's closer to the cut line than the Rockies would like to have him when they picked him to have a bobblehead night last season. And I think Sam Hilliard, who's hitting 133 and has 7 strikeouts and 15 at-bats. Yes, 15 at-bats, but he's kind of always been a strikeout guy. Those are 2 guys that are all of a sudden making this a little bit more of an interesting competition for who's going to play themselves out of being up next. And another name that I think flies under the radar a lot, and who knows what role he can carve out with the organization, but Greg Jones. He's 0 for 9 with 8 strikeouts so far in the spring. That's a lot of strikeouts, and that's a 88% strikeout rate. That is not something that you want to carry into the regular season, but the Rockies traded for him in an interesting move was it just last year? Maybe 2 years ago now. I think this is just the most interesting group of players on the roster right now because you don't know how it'll play out.
Yeah, I think it's true. And the upside too of all of those guys, where you look at Nolan Jones and Jordan Beck and say, like, those are 2 guys you'd love to have alongside Brenton Doyle for the next 4 or 5 seasons. I think Doyle still has 5 more years, including 2025 of club control. But then behind them, you still have, the Zach Veens and the Yankiel Fernandez and a Greg Jones, like these dynamic players that have certain, skill sets that are, can be somewhat elite. Jones and Veen, obviously, with their speed. Yankiel Fernandez with the power, and defense not great, but the arm strength really solid in the corners. So It does create an interesting dynamic. Hilliard does not have any more options left. So, sending him down simply isn't an option. Jones too doesn't have any options, but as you said, he's got a bobblehead. So I think that's pretty safe for him, to make the team. He did have 2 hits today, which I think is going to help him out just a little bit. Again, we've seen what his ceiling is. And, for as talented, I'll throw a name at you, as talented of a prospect as Charlie Condon is. You know what Charlie Condon has never done? Hit 20 home runs and stolen 20 bases in a single season. You know who has? Nolan Jones. And that was in 2/3 of a season in 2023. So look, prospects can be suspects, right? So Nolan Jones is a guy who has done it in the majors. So you're going to stick with a guy like him to be able to produce, and going back to Zach Veen, an interesting thing, and this is kind of similar to Chris Bryant. We talk about having momentum, whether or not that's a good spring or not. Zach Veen right now has health as a momentum, and you almost have to capitalize upon that, or else you sort of risk and you fear the risk of him becoming a Ryan Rollison, who, look, he just had unfortunate injuries, and unfortunately, I don't know that we'll ever see him in the majors. He's now relieving in the Rockies system in AAA. So I think there's still a lot of elements there for him to possibly have a good 2025. And maybe we do see him make his debut at some point this year, but he was a guy that just had a ton of unfortunate injuries. And again, that butterfly effect of, well, what if he had debuted, X whenever he's healthy, just to get him to debut? How does that change the course of time? In theory, nothing, right? Because he's still going about his business and unfortunate injuries just happen. But there's still that what if of, what if he had debuted? What could that have possibly done for him, right, going forward? And I sort of think that's the case with Zach Veen. Another guy who's battling for a roster spot and has pretty much been better than the 2 other guys at his position, that's Hunter Goodman. He's 6 for 12. That's 500. That's not hard math right there. 3 doubles, 3 RBI, 4 walks, and maybe the best number. It's only 12 at-bats, Noah, but 1 strikeout. We still got about 3 more weeks left of spring training, but coupled with the fact that Drew Romo has only 1 for 10, only 2 strikeouts in his 10 at-bats, so that's positive. He's putting the ball in play. But Hunter Goodman, for you right now, are you already locking him in as the other catcher next to Jacob Stallings, or is it still just too early?
I want to be able to lock him in. Your mom's favorite player, Blake Street Banter's icon. The crew loves him. I want to be able to lock him in, and he's played fantastic. Having, as you mentioned, 4 walks, that's huge for him. Huge improvement because he's been a free swinger. But when you have that much power, it kind of plays itself out. I think he does have more to prove to be able to be that second catcher simply because he hasn't played there a ton. But gosh, when the dude breaks your AAA home run record for just a single stretch, it was 34 in a super smaller amount of games a couple of years when he meteorically flew through the system. I wrote an article on it last year, and I'm trying to recall those numbers. He's shown that when he's able to time up that massive leg kick, he can be as dangerous as Carlos Gonzalez with his massive leg kick. It's kind of a reaching comparison, but they both had the big old leg kicks. I really want him to have a chance to solidify a roster spot early in the year, because it feels like in recent seasons and just last year, he kind of really, really had to earn it. Like, he was getting sporadic playing time, and when he did play well, then he was rewarded with another day. So if he's able to earn anything close to regular playing time early in the year, that'd be a huge win for Hunter Goodman, and I think the Rockies would take that. And I don't know how they'd react to, or what they would do with Drew Romo at that point. Do you send him to AAA? And what would you do if Hunter Goodman is your backup catcher on opening day? How do you manage the Drew Romo situation?
Yeah, I think whoever loses that matchup, and frankly, Austin Nola is in that conversation. He hasn't been great at the plate, but what he provides defensively. And again, if Hunter Goodman, even if he's playing at a fraction of what he is right now, I think he's shown that he's earned a spot alongside Jacob Stallings. But whoever loses that battle amongst the young catchers, then yeah, Drew Romo is just going to go back to AAA, kind of bide his time. And in theory, because of how good Hunter Goodman has been playing, and if he can continue to be somewhat of a force, it begs the question, like, okay, maybe not early on in the season, and that'll be frustrating, I think, for some Rockies fans whenever there's a young player who seemingly deserves more playing time. But I think eventually you could start to see Hunter Goodman catching 3 of the 5 Rockies starters, and then Jacob Stallings become more of a backup player. And again, we've got a long way to go until Hunter Goodman has a great first 3 months of the season. But if he can do that, playing 3 out of every 5 days, now you can go ahead and potentially cast off in a positive way Jacob Stallings to a contender who might need a catcher, and you call up Drew Romo, and now you've got 2 23-year-old catchers that, both have a decent hit tool and, varying degrees of defense. Now, again, that's a positive situation that you say, okay, you've got something here now for your future going forward, because I've said it before, like, lose another 100 games in 2025, but lose it with all of your young guys is much better than losing 90 games with a ton of veteran presence.
Yeah, I knew that both catchers were young. I did not realize that they were both 23, because if you look at Goody and then you look at Romo, I think Romo looks younger than 23 and Goody looks well over 23. So that's a nugget that I did not
Goodman
know.
is 25. Apologies,
Okay.
But Romo is 23. Yeah.
Okay. Well, still, I didn't realize it'd even be that close. That'd be perfect. And I think it all comes back to building blocks for future success. And you want to know what you have, ideally before they make it to the big leagues. And we've talked about that in the past, where you don't want to be finding out if your prospects have it when they're 2 years into struggling in the big leagues. Like, you don't want to be going off of potential at that point. Other teams know what they have in their prospects and know how to send them through the system on a trajectory where it makes sense. I think having the altitude effect on these players really impacts consistency. And for young players, you have to be consistent to continue to play. But yes, I think, gosh, a world where we're entering August and Goodman and Romo are the catchers, every Rockies fan would be perfectly happy with that, even if the record is 5 games, 10 games, behind the pace that it was in April and May when Jacob Stallings was catching every night or 2 out of every 3 days. And I think just it all comes back to opportunity. And I think you look at the other side of the ball, not so much hitting, but on the pitching side, and you begin to consider, okay, are we going to continue to roll out Austin Gomber as our 5th starter, or is it time to really start to hand the keys to the young guys that are proving they deserve a chance? I think the first name that comes to mind is Bradley Blalock, who pitched today, gave up his first run of the year, but his ERA is still 1 point something because he's pitched 8 innings and given up that only the 1 run. Saw something today about Austin Gomber dealing with some soreness. And do you have any more on that? And also what Blalock has done so far this spring?
Yeah, that's a good question. Austin Gomber, I really had him pegged for somewhat of a breakout campaign in 2025. And by breakout, I mean another 30 starts, which would only be his second time doing that, and a low 4 ERA, which for the Rockies is very solid going into free agency. I think would have set him up, really well for teams to, possibly give him a 4-year deal, worth $40+ million. Like that's just what's good starting pitchers are really worth. And him being a left-hander, they age fairly well. After his age 31 season, I think he could possibly get paid. But yeah, he's going through some shoulder issues. He said if this was, during the regular season, he probably would be fine going forward. But considering that, we're still 3+ weeks away from opening day, and then 6 months, more of the regular season to go, you want to be a little bit cautious. So that's really what this is about, being cautious. And, kind of to your point, I think the fact that, Gomber sees how many really good young starting pitchers there is a little bit of an opportunity for not just him, but for the Rockies to, baby him a little bit in a positive way, to be cautious with him because of the success of guys like a Bradley Blalock, who we saw this last year where, he can fill the strike zone and still miss bats. Only 1 walk and 8 strikeouts in his 8 innings pitched so far this spring. So he's been a really pleasant surprise. But again, he was able to do that in spurts last year. I think a little bit better than a guy like Tanner Gordon, who also was able to make his debut and ultimately ended up having, certain struggles. But Blalock's been, certainly a bright spot. He did get the first start in the Cactus League, lid lifter, getting the ball going. Chase Dollander, I think, has been solid despite the fact he has an ERA north of 7. He has been showing a certain tenacity, showing the right mindset of that next pitch mentality, which you need to have at Coors Field. It's not the pitch you just threw and the home run you gave up. It's the next home run that you need to be thinking about and be wary of. And Dollander just seems to have, a certain way about him that's just very wise beyond his years. A very cool cucumber in the best possible way. So he's also, part of that depth piece where if somebody else goes down or Senzatella or Herman Marquez is not able to get their season started because they too perhaps could have some kind of nagging injuries, you want to be cautious so that you have the most healthy pitchers for the longest period of time. And if some of them aren't healthy at the beginning of the year, that's okay. Put them on the IL so that they can be healthier, during the larger middle parts of the season, during those dog days. So Rockies have a little bit of a luxury right now with the starting pitching situation.
Yeah, and I want to continue to talk about the pitchers in a second, but first, while we're talking about Dollander, gosh, I was watching that game against Arizona because we didn't get to watch the game against the Giants in the Stone Age facility. And I was, it was a bit disappointing to see a couple home runs early. A Eugenio Suarez 3-run homer. It feels like every time I watch Suarez, he's hitting a nuke. But I thought early, and I don't know, were you there for this game?
I was at the Giants start, and it was everyone kept doing did you see that? Did you see that curveball? What was the StatCast on that one? Like, what pitch was that? Okay, I thought so. Like, because they actually have a really good press box at Scottsdale Stadium. It's like, it's really low. It's close behind home plate. He looked fantastic. Gave up the home run to Jung-Hoo Lee, but again, was very calm about it and continued on. 3-pitch strikeout to Lamont Wade Jr. to start the game. His stuff looked gross. And that's good. That's a good word.
Yeah.
The University of Indiana, gross is a compliment.
Yeah. Heck yeah. Well, and I just felt watching the Arizona game that it was clear that the Diamondbacks were hunting fastball, and it was cool to see Dollander and the catcher and the pitching coach adjust to throw more off speed. And then Dollander really rolled from there. But like you said, just his ability to bounce back and fight through hardship, even if it's spring training, it's refreshing to see. And I just think you want Dollander to be in the right headspace heading into his major league debut, and hopefully that's sooner rather than later. You are the professional at contract manipulation. I listen, but ideally we're seeing Chase Dollander sooner rather than later at Coors Field. And I guess going back to more arms in the staff so far, what other pitchers have you kind of caught your eye, whether good or bad so far?
I would say, Zach Agnos has been a name that people have been buzzing about a lot. He's not a guy that's on the 40-man roster, so that does make it harder for him to break camp on opening day when they play the Tampa Bay Rays on March 28th. But with how the 40-man roster has been shaking up, right, they're down to 39 after the loss of Justin Lawrence getting claimed by the Pittsburgh Pirates. You will have Jeff Criswell go on the 60-day IL as he'll need Tommy John surgery. I'm not sure when that's going to be scheduled for. And sure, I think Diego Castillo is going to take Criswell's spot on the 40-man and in the bullpen once you get him to the 60-day IL. So there's still one more spot on the 40-man and potentially on the 26-man roster. So that could go to a guy like Zach Agnos, who has impressed the Rockies coaching staff. Entering today, he did have 4 shutout innings and hadn't walked a batter. Only missed 1 bat, only had the 1 strikeout, but he gave up a pair of solo home runs on Tuesday to the Reds, Will Benson and Tyler Stevenson. So 2 professional hitters right there. Still, in general, he's been just a kind of a real steady and mature guy that has really faced a lot of decent adversity, throughout his career in various ways, going to a smaller school and University of California, Santa Barbara. Like, that's just not a place where a ton of guys will come out of school from, right? Like, it's a California school, Division I, that's good, but still overlooked a lot. And he's not a guy with a taller stature. He is, probably on the shorter side of guys, but he just has good enough stuff that I think he could make an impact immediately on that opening day roster. And when the time comes for him to, take a bit of a breather, whether it's an IL stint or just going back to AAA Albuquerque, you have enough guys that are in the bullpen in Albuquerque that have options that you can keep shuffling and shuttling back and forth on I-25 from your Jake Birds to your Jaden Hills. I don't think Victor Vodnik and Seth Halvorsen are going to be in that category, as those are two guys that could end up being your closer for the season. But Jimmy Herget is another guy with options. Juan Mejia, who's yet to make his major league debut. He's another guy that's on the 40-man roster that you could call up. So Agnos has been interesting, and I think he's a guy that we're going to see at some point during the course of this season, and he's going to build some good momentum for himself. And you said it too as you were wrapping up about Chase Dollander, about giving him the most momentum, and it just seems like it would be very hard for sending him to AAA because he really has nothing else to prove in the Eastern League with AA Hartford Yard Goats. How's a starting pitcher? How's any human being that's not a hitter going to build any momentum in the Pacific Coast League, right? So that being said, I tend to lean on the side of start him out in the rotation. And I think there's right now I'll put it at about 55 to 60% chance that he does make the starting rotation. And then if he gets knocked around a little bit, or even if he kind of holds his own, right? You could have a 6 ERA in 3 or 4 starts and still relatively, considering, hold your own. You're like, you gave up that home run in the 5th inning as you were on your way out. You gave up that home run, but otherwise you looked solid. You had a quality start just about all around. So you can still have numbers that don't look great over 4 starts, but still hold your own, and then say, okay, you got some momentum. You got a taste for the majors. Now go work on some things. We still think you're a big leaguer. We still think you're a part of our future. We wanted to give you this opportunity. You got a taste. You took a big bite out of it. A bite got taken out of you. Go back to AAA, bide your time for you, then come up and make an impact and stay here. That's momentum more so than go to AAA, do your best to survive, and then, we'll call you if somebody gets hurt, despite the fact you might have a 6 ERA, which is fine because we saw Jeff Criswell have success despite those really bad numbers in the Pacific Coast League. So I'm kind of with you, jump on that momentum, keep him in that starting rotation. For you, has there been any pitchers? Or go ahead and respond to anything I said that inspired a thought.
55 to 60% chance to see Dollander in the opening rotation is much higher than I thought it had a chance at being. So that's super exciting in itself. I think the other part of your response that I'm glad you brought up was Justin Lawrence, because just about this time last year, James and I were talking about, can this be the year that he secures the closer role for good? And obviously that didn't happen. And I remember that conversation. I was kind of convincing James that was possible, and he wasn't having it. I guess James was right. We can go back and check the receipts. But it's worth mentioning because seems as though it was mutual. I know we've talked in the chat this week, kind of good for him to get a fresh start somewhere else. I mean, he's still got that just devastating sweeper that we see all the time on Pitching Ninja. But it does open the door for, and I assume as soon as that move happened, Halvorsen and Vodnik kind of looked at each other like, all right, if you don't get the 9th, then you're going to get the 8th inning. And so it has a domino effect, because now you also need another man in the setup role. And I'm looking here at the rundown at some of the most crazy stats I've ever seen by some of the candidates that would figure to be up for that role. Can you break down Jaden Hill's spring so far?
Yeah, it's with all of these pitchers more so than hitters. 20 at bats is only 20 at bats, right? That's That's a week of games. And we know guys can have a bad week. For pitchers, it feels like it's even less because all it takes is, you give up, a 3-run home run and your stats are screwed forever. I mean, look at Kyle Freeland. That's one of my favorite parts is when you go to like game logs for a player and you see a pitcher's ERA at like, what was Freeland's, like 44 to start the season, or maybe it was even beyond, maybe it was like infinity or something.
Yeah.
And then it goes to like 17 and then it's 12 and then it's 10. You're like, oh, it's continuing to improve. And it takes a long time to bring those numbers down. And so one bad outing can do that. And so that's kind of been the case for Jaden Hill, which is a little inexplicable. And I certainly didn't have the time to go through and try to figure this out, but it is curious how you can throw 3 innings, not allow a single hit, and have a 12 ERA. That's a little bit strange. He did walk 2 hitters, so maybe he left the game early at some point, and the next guy ended up giving up those inherited runners. But he struck out 1. That's going to happen in spring. I also find it interesting that both Jake Bird and Diego Castillo have thrown 4 innings. They've each walked at least 3 hitters. Bird has actually walked 4. They've each struck out 4, but Bird has a 0 ERA and Castillo has a 9 ERA. Much of that having to do with the fact that Bird hasn't allowed a hit. Castillo has allowed 5 hits, including a home run. So, look, those are some of the things that, numbers are, they're going to lie to, about relief pitchers. I think Jeffrey Yan has had some really solid numbers. And, there's been a lot of discussion on social media like, oh, he struck out the side. There was a lot of traffic in the inning that he struck out 3 guys. So I don't think technically you can say it's like the debate about when is it batting around, when all 9 guys hit or when the 10th guy comes back around. It's like, did you strike out the side if you gave up 2 runs or if you had, the bases loaded and all 3 of your outs just happened to be strikeouts? I don't know, but he's a guy that has had a lot of traffic and he's gotten out of those jams, which is important, but odds are against you being able to replicate that over and over again. He is one of those interesting arms that could potentially be a left-handed guy for Buddy behind Scott Alexander, who we know after he signed his 1-year, $2 million deal is a lock to be one of the 2 lefties. I think Luis Peralta is pretty locked in at about 90%, since you like your percentiles, Noah. He's at 90% going to be the second lefty in the bullpen. Yan could be a guy that we end up seeing doing his jump splits in Denver, maybe by midseason. We'll see.
Well, and it's just exciting to be saying that because 2 weeks ago, you're inviting Jeffrey Yan to come in, pitch, probably just a spring thing. And now he's kind of taken the internet by storm. Aaron and I love talking about the Rockies' optics and how they're ever evolving and they can be volatile a lot of the times. But Jeffrey Yan has gotten the Rockies some major social media presence, and
sure,
it's just been funny to witness that. I like that you mentioned Luis Peralta. I'm on record. He's the arm that I'm most excited about this upcoming season. I think for his age, he's so young, and people just weren't touching him last year. And I know now there's a scouting report amongst big league hitters, but still, it feels like, and this is kind of a recurring theme that I've talked about it with you, I've talked about it with James, I've talked about it with Aaron, like entering a season with this much excitement in a bullpen, and shoot, you've been covering the team longer than I have. We talked about on Thursday, Aaron and I mentioned that the last time we were this excited about a bullpen is when they built the super pen with Jake McGee, Wade Davis, and Brian Shaw. And Shaw's still out there doing it this spring training, I saw. Gosh, it feels so much different because it's not a, $81 million pen amongst 3 guys. And now it's just a bunch of young guys.
100+ million for those 3 guys.
Yeah, 100+ ERA. No,
I actually like their bullpen in 2022, where I forget who they signed. I mean, they've had a couple of guys, like a lot of their veteran relief pitchers that they've picked up the last couple of years have actually been pretty solid, from Pierce Johnson to Brent Suter. Alex Colomé was one of those guys back in 2022. But you're right. This is a much more exciting bullpen. And I'll have to show you my DMs because Pirates fans can't stop saying, hey, can we have Luis Peralta back? Please, can we get Luis Peralta back? That was, do you want to take Justin Lawrence back? And then Luis Peralta. I'm like, no, that's not going to work out like that. I'm curious for you. What is your favorite piece of social media content that you've seen of Jeffrey Yan so far? I've got my favorite. I'm curious if it's your favorite that you've seen so far.
Yeah, so I actually, just 30 minutes before we hopped on here, saw a video edit of him jumping over Jose Altuve. And it was like, the caption was like, "Here I am trying to imagine if Jeffrey Yan could jump over Jose Altuve." And that was incredible. Did you happen to see that too?
That was also my favorite is watching that one. Yeah, that's pretty good. I mean, someone will have to, set him jumping up, doing the split to some Elvis Presley music, have him like a cape with a crown on and, doing that whole thing, maybe a little bit of a James Brown impression, something like that. Just a performer, a rock god doing their thing. Yeah, Jeffrey Yan's been interesting to say the least, for sure.
I feel like I need to do my own research and find out if he used to do hurdles or something like that, because the dude gets up, and his hip and knee flexibility when he comes down to the ground for the celebration. There's not a lot of guys that can do that. There's not a lot of guys you want to try to do that, because he's in such a unique stance, just hovering above the ground. I'm curious, were you there for any of the outings that he was out there?
Yeah, just one. I was in the clubhouse at the time, and all of the relievers, sometimes in between games, guys are out, they're working out, doing their thing. But some of the guys who had already pitched in the game or who are going to go tomorrow are wrapping up. There were a lot of relievers standing around the televisions watching his performances. And then another guy, someone that we talked about today, came in and said, "I want to see him strike somebody out. I want to see him do the jump split." So like, people are excited. He doesn't do it in practice. Like, it makes sense. But he's been, exciting, and, like you said, something positive in spring training to distract a little bit to a degree. Here we are recording this on Tuesday, March 4th, and we're now exactly 1 month away from the home opener back at Coors Field, which, for some folks who might have mixed emotions about it, because, prices are obviously usually a lot higher for a home opener versus just about any other game of the year other than the Dodgers and Yankees, right? And the simple fact that there are folks that, don't really want to support the team, or rather support the owner. They want to support the players, but the owners is a completely separate topic. So you can understand that. But this is still, an exciting time of the year where, there are still a couple of those camp battles. We already talked about what the catcher situation was going to be like, the starting pitchers. For closer, what's your thought on where Buddy should go? Should it be more of a reliable guy, like a veteran like Tyler Kinley, who's done it in the past and has shown that ability in those high pressure situations to put him in that spot to fail? And I say that in the best possible way, where if he fails, he's going to shrug it off. He's going to be fine. If you take him out in that spot, that's fine. He'll be ready to bounce back, whatever you need, coach, right? Like, he's going to be fine. Or do you want to maybe go to one of the younger guys who Victor Vodnik was able to do it for a long stretch? I want to say 9 saves last year. Would have had a lot more had he not gone on the IL in the middle of August, right in the middle of his run to saving games with right bicep inflammation. Or do you go even younger with the guy that I know Ryan Spilborghs wants to get the nickname off the ground of Gas? You like Gas? Halvorsen? You like Seth? Who is the guy in that trio that you would like to see at least start the season as the closer?
Yeah, I like it to be Kinley, and I think I like that for the reason you mentioned. Closer is a spot where if you're not playing well, you're going to get replaced, and I think the psyche of a young player being replaced is not as strong or weathered as someone like Tyler Kinley. And I think it's an interesting case because Kinley, before he hurt his arm in 2022, was having 2023. He was pitching to a 0.7 ERA before he went down, and he was like about to be the Rockies all-star candidate as a reliever. Then he goes down, and last year, I know the ERA wasn't pretty, but I remember we dove into the high leverage versus low leverage scenarios, the stat that exists on Baseball Reference. And in high leverage spots, the dude was lights out. He loves pitching under pressure. And so that's a great thing to have as a closer. And I think we've seen managers come out in the past and say it like the greatest commodity to have in the sport is a shutdown closer. And so if the Rockies can get that from a Tyler Kinley, well, that's another year of the investment in Kinley being well worth it. And that's another guy that, like you mentioned, the veteran relievers that the Rockies have signed have paid dividends in recent seasons. So I like him to be the closer. Then I would go to Vodnik because he's done it more than Halvorsen has. And shoot, eventually you might have to make a switch, and you have these guys that you feel at least comfortable with filling in that position. And so that's where I would go. What about you?
Yeah, I know the team prefers Seth Halvorsen right now. And I think they would like to give him the ball in the ninth. But for every reason that you just explained, I think it makes a lot of sense to have Tyler Kinley in the ninth, because we're not talking about, winning a spot on the roster, because everyone agrees it's going to be Vodnik, Halvorsen, and Kinley somewhere in the 7th, 8th, and 9th, right? Like that's guaranteed. So it's not about a place on the roster. It's a role. It's just where those guys are going to get those outs. Now, if you're doing it in the 9th, higher leverage situation, more pressure packed, the game's on the line. You're going to win more games than not. But as we've kind of touched on already in this episode, winning and losing games this year is not as important as winning and losing games in 2026 and 2027 and 2028. And you could argue like, well, yeah, find out what you got in some of these young guys, because if you do got a lockdown closer, then you're going to win more games in 2026, 27, etc. But I don't think you need to know that now. And going back to the conversations you and James had about Justin Lawrence, you thought you had one of those young guys, and maybe the spotlight was just a little bit too big for Justin Lawrence at that point in his career. And I think with him being plastered all over the place with his sweeper, teams got the scouting report and said, oh, this guy is supposed to be the next big thing. Well, let's humble him a little bit, right? Clint Hurdle says, all throughout his new book, Hurdleisms, is there's two types of players: the one that's been humbled and the one that's about to be. So, I think if you can protect Halvorsen and Vodnik, who will still get those opportunities, you can still allow them to pitch in big spots, right? You can still have Halvorsen in a game in the 8th with the bases loaded against LA at Dodger Stadium. That's still going to be a feather in his cap. Whether or not those are the final 3 outs and whether or not you win that game is somewhat moot, right? Sure, it would be a little bit, nicer to have it, be a win, but still that is big league experience that is different when we're talking about the closer's role than a spot on the roster. They have that spot. So all things being considered, would be great for one of those guys to just go out and be like Eric Gagne, like through the entire of their career, like Kenley Jansen. You're like, oh, he's just been a premier elite closer forever. Craig Kimbrell, Aroldis Chapman. Maybe that's what you've got. And maybe that's how it plays out, and it'll be totally fine. And so if they go with Halvorsen right away, cool, great. Maybe it totally works out. But if they do decide to give the ball to Tyler Kinley, it's a totally different situation than saying Sean Bouchard and Nick Martini are going to be our platoon in right field. That's different, right? Because you're taking that time away from Jordan Beck. We're just talking about a role, not a roster spot when it comes to Vodnik, Halvorsen, and Kinley.
I think it's tough to respond to that because I agree with everything that you said, and I think it makes the most sense just from a logistical standpoint of building these guys up rather than risking tearing them down. And I think you get a guy to master. I'll respond to the point where you said some might say it's better to put the young guy in the 9th inning immediately, because if you do have that shutdown closer, then you find out earlier. You look at the other side, as they progressively get better and better, working in lower leverage situations, the 7th and 8th inning, like they're going to be well prepared, very confident moving into the 9th inning. And so I really do think this is far and away the best route that the Rockies could take with this.
Yeah, Jordan Beck in right field. If we're talking about that positional battle, it's Jordan Beck versus the world, I think, in many ways. Would you, if let's say something happens where Beck starts to struggle in the second half, are you more inclined to give that spot to a Zach Veen, or are you okay with doing some kind of piecemeal with Sam Hilliard and Bouchard, or Hilliard and Martini, something like that? Do you want to see a young guy out there and right, regardless of who it is?
I want to see a young guy out there and right and shoot. You and I were the biggest fans in the stadium of Sean Bouchard's walk-up song last summer. But hey, we can go to Albuquerque and listen to it, right? I think if it comes to that, we'll be happy doing that. That's the side I stand on, and I'm not even standing close to the fence. I'm well over there promoting Zach Veen, Jordan Beck wave this season. And based on our conversations, it feels like you're on that side of the fence as well.
Yeah. I'd like to see one of the young guys for sure. Absolutely. Anything else on your mind in terms of the Rockies before we move on to a more depressing topic?
Yeah. Well, I like the fact that our Colorado Rockies are second in run differential in the sport. That means something. And so that's what we opened with, and that's what we'll wind down our Rockies talk with.
Yeah. No, it's good. It's exciting. Strange thing in the schedule, they've got no game on Thursday. There's only 2 real days off in spring training, and Thursday is going to be one. What are you going to do now on Thursday with there not being a Rockies game?
Gosh, I might have to go play basketball or plan out a productive couple of hours and knock out some assignments. Got midterms coming up next week before break, so that it might be a good time to prepare for that. But it feels like the players are probably going to all be on the golf course if I had to guess.
Yeah, probably. They might be able to do back-to-back days on the golf course. You're going to be very productive after Wednesday's 1-10 game in Peoria against the Padres, because there's no game on Thursday. And then Friday is their first and one of only a few night games, 6:40 Mountain Standard Time. That's a night game. That'll be on KOA. Not sure if that'll be, on the MLB at that app with, the Rangers covering it. I know Rockies TV has games next week. I think that's going to be the 12th and 13th at Salt River Fields, Padres, Guardians. My boy Mark Stout's going to be on the call on that game on Thursday the 13th against the Guardians. So that should be a fun one. But talk about players golfing. I really hope they're not going to be golfing, I don't know, next August, because, there's definitely a fight brewing between the Players Association and the owners. It's one of the reasons why when they figured out this most recent CBA, why they moved the World Baseball Classic off of that 4-year track that they've barely been on. They've only had a 4-year, the 4-year track like 3 different times. And then like the other 3, it was 6 years and then 3 years. So they said, well, you know what? Let's not do it in 2027 because we could be dealing with a lockout. Let's move it up a year. So we're getting World Baseball Classic next spring. This time next year, we're doing World Baseball Classic again. That's all right. Yes, I'm excited for it. Giving me every 3 years. But part of the reason is because we could have another work stoppage. And, head of the Players Association, Tony Clark, talked about this recently, and it's something that a lot of people have been whispering about here and there. I think it's partially because we want to celebrate now in the 2025. This could be the last full regular season, because now a lockout is what the owners do to the players during an off season, right? But a strike is what we got in 1994 when the players said, well, look, the owners are going to lock us out ahead of 1995, so we might as well strike early so that we have some leverage, because there's no way they're going to allow there to be no World Series. That's crazy. That's never happened before. So let's strike now. We'll get a deal done maybe in a week tops. And they didn't. And we didn't have a World Series in 1994. We had a delay. The first ever game in 1995 at Coors Field was not the one where Dante Bichette hit the walk-off home run. There were 2 games with replacement players, Yankees against the Rockies in late March. Not a lot of people realize that. That's the lost history of Coors Field right there for you. But it looks like we could be looking at something like that again. Are you sick to your stomach to think about we could be losing more games either in 2026 or 2027?
Yeah, well, the COVID season was bad enough because that was the closest thing I've had to a mini strike. I remember we were nearing the end of May and the players and the commissioner couldn't agree, the owners couldn't agree on a way to play the games. And so it was like every week a new article dropped that said, well, instead of 120 games, now we're going to do 100. Now we're going to do 80. And it ended up being 60 games. Rockies started 11-3 and somehow missed the playoffs. That was rough. But that I did not like that. And shoot, like I still have to read up on how this stuff happens. But I know it's all about money, and gosh, baseball players make so much money. But they also know what they're worth, and they have a great union that is able to continue to increase that. And so, yes, it does make me sick to my stomach because I don't like anything that involves uncertainty, and this is too close to that.
Yeah, keep in mind, for every dollar that a baseball player earns, the owners earn about 100. So yeah, they make 100 times. All right, it's millionaires versus billionaires, which is still something that we can't comprehend for something that's a kid's game. But there is a lot of principle that's at stake, and for there's tons of give and take where the owners do a really good job at trying to spin things to say, well, we're going to give you this gift of a salary floor, but then we're going to get a salary cap, which now is going to tamp down the earnings of players like a Juan Soto and Shohei Ohtani, who again are elite players, but you want to make as much money as possible, and there are only a few guys that can actually make that. The middle class of free agents are just absolutely being wiped out. So in many ways, I think a salary floor could be somewhat helpful, but you got expansion too. You got to figure that out, because that's something that would come with this next CBA. And, our owner's going to spin this into saying, well, if we do have expansion, we are giving your Players Association 52 new big league roster spots and 80 40-man roster spots, right? So you guys are benefiting from that. Meanwhile, the owners are going to be making $2 billion for each team. So that's $4 billion that they're going to split 30 ways. So they're going to be getting about $150 million each when it comes to expansion. But of course, they're going to want to play it to the players like, hey, you guys are benefiting with more jobs. That should be a good thing, right? So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, but hopefully they can figure it out so that we don't lose more games, because that's just something that nobody wants. And baseball can't really afford right now in this climate where they are losing eyes, in different ways to the NFL, even in the NFL's off season, right? They just don't have an off season to the NBA and just various other sports that are continuing to grow. So it's a shame. Baseball's not a dying sport like I kind of thought it was, 5+ years ago. It's not going away anytime soon, but we want to see it grow. And a lot of the changes that have been made recently with the rules, I think has, made the game a lot more reachable to audiences, because the games are under 3 hours, and because, on social media, there's a lot more clips, and you have people like Pitching Ninja, making baseball look a lot more fun. So that would certainly be a shame if we lose something like that. Say something positive, Noah. Say something happy. Tell a joke.
I think relating to the expansion, I saw the new stadium proposal that would be approved in Portland.
That's right.
That looked sweet.
Which state, though? Which Portland?
Oregon.
You didn't sound very sure. Oregon? Yes. Oregon. Yeah. That one looked really solid. I mean, Portland's a place where I just wouldn't have guessed that, the city would have passed enough, tax codes and all that stuff, because they're, they can be very reserved when it comes to stuff like that. But I mean, they're checking off all the right boxes. And, I still kind of have Salt Lake City, perhaps a notch above Portland, but they're kind of 1A, 1B as far as the Western expansion teams are concerned. I did 2 hours on MLB's expansion coming up here over on the Rockies Insider channel on YouTube. I think we all know, Nashville is going to be that other place in the East, but it would be wild to think that maybe there were 2 West Coast teams, where if Salt Lake City and Portland were to get an MLB team, that would be wild.
And then move the Rockies out of the NL West.
Oh, they would absolutely be gone. I mean, we might just lose American League, National League altogether. They might just kill those names, and it'd be like a Western Eastern Conference. Either that, or everyone just switches. Like they would be in the American League Western Central, or however you'd want to call the American League Heartland. Like I don't know what they would call it, but you're absolutely right. That would be, even if there is only one team in the West, the Rockies are moving out because you now are going to have 8 4-team divisions. So you're going to have the Rockies going against probably Kansas City, the Rangers, and the Astros. You like the sound of that, don't you?
We should be the biggest proponents of expansion. The Blake Street Banter needs to take that up and start spreading the movement.
That's it. I mean, it certainly would benefit the Rockies in a big way to not have to deal with certain glass. But again, now you're only playing the Dodgers 9 times a year now, right? Like it's not as bad as it once was, 12 times a year. So, but still, you're right. Expansion is going to make things very, very interesting. Noah, you make things really interesting in your writing and on social media. Let folks know where they can check all that out at.
I appreciate that. Yeah, just go ahead and follow me at Noah Spirek and at Blake Street Banter. I like keeping the fun stuff on there.
I'm trying to do a better job at you pointing to where your name is. There you go.
Thank you.
I'm at Patrick D. Lyons or at Patrick D. Lyons MLB, running the Rockies Insider, both the podcast, the YouTube channel, and the newsletter. You'll be excited to know that I talked with Hunter Goodman about his MLB debut patch card.
Ooh.
So I'll be writing about that here very shortly for the Rockies Insider newsletter. And Noah, you've got the big sign off, right? You've been practicing the spiel for ending the show. Is that right?
Oh, well, I guess maybe internally, but I can give it a shot. Thank you for listening to Blake Street Banter. Be sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram. We're on Blue Sky and TikTok as well. Drop a subscription on YouTube, Apple Pods, or Spotify. You can find us anywhere. And thank you for listening to this week's episode of Blake Street Banter.
See ya.